Hello, and welcome back to Refuge in Conversation with. I'm Larome, and I'm excited to be hosting today's episode with our guest, Ellie Softly from Everyone's Invited. I am the Youth Tech Abuse Lead at Refuge, and my role focuses on supporting children and young people within our refuges. I also support parents as well through tech empowerment workshops and also do online safety workshops also. Within my role, I also look at emerging trends in children's technology through independent research and also feedback from the workshops I facilitate. I use this knowledge to improve awareness and increase understanding among the wider team at Refuge. This very important conversation has been inspired by Safer Internet Day today. Safer Internet Day is the UK's biggest celebration of online safety. Each year, an online issue or theme is covered that highlights what young people are seeing and experiencing online. This year's theme, created in consultation with young people across the UK, focuses on the issue of online scams, including how young people can protect themselves and others, as well as what support is available to them. Ellie is the head of education at Everyone's Invited, which is a survivor-centred charity with a mission to expose and eradicate rape culture with empathy, compassion and understanding. I also would like to take a moment to thank Votes for Schools for generously providing the data we'll be referring to throughout this episode. Votes for Schools is a fantastic resource hub and voting platform for young people aged 5 to 18, with a strong ethos of empowering young voices and building oratory, confidence and critical thinking. Their work ensures that children and young people have a say on important topics, and we're excited to explore some of their insights today. A huge thank you to Votes for Schools for supporting this conversation today. Now, before we dive into today's conversation, I do want to mention today's episode will touch on some sensitive topics which may be triggering. If you are listening today and you feel that you may need some support with anything discussed, there is support available. Here at Refuge, we run a national domestic abuse helpline, which you can reach on 0808 2000 247. It is open every day and is available 24/7. We also have BSL interpreters available from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m, Monday to Friday. There is also a live chat service available on our website, although please be mindful of whether you can access this from a safe device. Now, thank you, Ellie, for joining me today on today's episode. And I'm giving you and Everyone's Invited a mini intro, but please do tell us more about the work that you do.
Thanks so much for having me and for such a lovely introduction as well. I'm really excited to be here today and to be able to speak about this really important issue. So yeah, I'm Ellie Softly. I'm the head of education at Everyone's Invited, and I'm also one of the founding members of the charity and movement. And just to give you a little bit of background on who we are. So we are a registered charity now, but we started as an online grassroots movement. And we're dedicated to exposing and eradicating rape culture. We began by advocating for survivors. So we created a platform to amplify their voices, to foster positive change, and also engage with the government and different institutions and key stakeholders as well. It was founded in the summer of 2020 by our CEO and founder, Soma Sara, after she shared her experience of rape culture and sexual violence during her time at school. And she posted her experience on her Instagram account, and hundreds of people started responding to it saying, actually, the exact same thing has happened to me. And I kind of can't believe I've never really put two and two together. Can you share this story from me? And so Soma would share their story. And by the end of that month, it was thousands of people. So she decided to set up a website called Everyone's Invited, which provided a safe space for survivors to share their stories, giving them a sense of catharsis and empowerment, a feeling of community and hope. And essentially in March of 2021, it just exploded all over national news. We had 50,000 submissions onto our website, over 100,000 people in our online community, and it sparked mass conversation and debate around sexual abuse in schools and how young people were being educated around sex and the kind of digital sphere of sex that they were now kind of venturing into. And so we have, as an established charity now, we do a lot of advocacy work. We also have an education program. So we go up and down the UK and internationally as well, talking to young people about rape culture, using our testimonies and survivor voices to talk to them about making change. And then we have a kind of research arm as well. So looking into our testimonies and trying to understand, how this is happening, why this is happening. So yeah, that's a little bit of background about us and what we do.
Thank you so much for being here today, Ellie. And I do also want to say thank you for the vital work that you and the team are doing at Everyone's Invited to create empowering spaces for people to express themselves. Now, I want to start off the conversation asking you, Ellie, what do you think of this year's theme for Safer Internet Day? Too good to be true, protecting yourself and others from harm. And also, what are you doing at Everyone's Invited to mark the day?
So I think that this year's theme is important as ever. Our education team specifically has seen a real stark rise in cases where children are falling for scams over the past few years. And one of the most pressing issues young people are facing is to do with sextortion. So sextortion is the practice of extorting money or sexual favors from someone by threatening to reveal evidence of their sexual activity. And where we're seeing this in particular is amongst a lot of young men and boys. So we know that boys aged 13 to 17 are actually the demographic that are most at risk for financial sextortion. And we're seeing that in a lot of the schools that we go to. And just as a kind of a story that was shared with us that I think really represents how dangerous and terrifying this issue is. We worked with a teacher who had recently had a student who had taken their own life, a 12-year-old boy who had been a victim of sextortion. He came home one night from school. He started speaking to somebody who he thought was, a girl that was interested to him on Snapchat and asked him to send photos, and he did. And it turned out that it was a scammer, somebody that wasn't even in this country, and he took his own life that evening. So within a matter of hours, that's the kind of catastrophe that was laid out from that activity, from that happening. And in 2023, 91% of sextortion victims in the UK were men. So those reports of financial sextortion have continued to rise over, the past 2 years. And we feel that as a charity, awareness of those online scams that can happen to children are really important. And it's something we're not talking about enough. And in part because another issue that we're seeing every day in the classroom is the pressure that social media influencers are having in the classroom. And this is something that I think is so important that we're talking about when we think about, online scams and cybercrime. And this is around this kind of rise of the online misogynist and kind of toxic influencers. There are lots of influencers and kind of micro influencers on TikTok in particular. And it's now sort of starting to move over a lot onto YouTube Shorts, really interestingly. But they've been making content aimed at manipulating, vulnerable young people, especially boys in particular, we're finding, and playing on a lot of insecurities and existing kind of gendered pressures. And what they're doing is they're selling their own fitness programs or guides on like how to be the best man or how to be the most man. And they're making a ton of money by doing that. They're kind of, the way that they're doing it, the scam that they have is by being men and making a lot of money, and they pick up on kind of all of the issues that are facing young men. So they'll think about, loneliness, mental health crisis, pressure to be very rich, a pressure to have sex at a young age, a pressure to be in relationships. And then they kind of flaunt and present the way that they look and the lifestyle that they have, that a lot of the time is fake and curated. And then they basically package it up and they say, look, buy my fitness program or join my Forex trading group or be part of this scheme, which at the end of the day turns out to be a pyramid scheme. And the way that it works, as I'm sure a lot of your audience know, the algorithm, it means that the more a young person consumes from one of those influencers, the more similar content that they'll get. And we are seeing this take a massive hold in classrooms across the UK. I mean, working with schools that are having to intercept orders of bulking powders to 11-year-olds at the school gates. And, young people being, trading and being involved in Forex trading instead of just being a kid, being a child. So they sell their programs on the basis that they can like fix young people's issues, make men stronger, fitter, and more kind of an alpha character, which is what we hear a lot of the time in schools. And also a lot of that content on TikTok condemns women and relationships and the idea of gender inequality. And what's really important is that young people can be critical and really question that content and where they're getting their information from. So in connection to this, for Safer Internet Day, we're going to be launching a social media campaign where we're going to be asking our team what they do as individuals to stay safe. So at EI, we really believe that teaching critical analysis skills in schools should be a huge priority so that we can really emphasize, and we really want to emphasize some of those skills. In Helsinki, for example, children as young as 8 years old are being taught how to think critically about what they consume online and in the media more generally. And I think, and we think at EI, in an era in which many social media platforms will no longer have fact-checking services available, this is more vital than ever to be teaching at a young age.
I'm in awe of your plans for Safe Internet Day at Everyone's Invited, and I wish you all a successful launch of your social media campaign. You've also touched on some important points and statistics here, especially around sextortion, which at Refuge is also seen as a pressing concern. So my next question to you, Ellie, is, do you think we take cybercrime seriously?
So cybercrime is a growing concern, and it's something we're having more conversations about at Everyone's Invited. And while lots of significant positive changes are being made, there's obviously a lot of room for improvement. The introduction of measures like the online safety bill are massively positive steps forward, and that's indicating some progress in addressing this issue. However, the problem is that the digital landscape is changing so rapidly and constantly, and emerging trends can make it feel like it's almost impossible to keep up with it. But we believe, as a charity, to tackle that effectively, it's basically essential to adopt holistic approaches. So everyone needs to be involved in the conversation. We need roundtable discussions with victims of cybercrime to better understand their experiences and needs. We need policies and solutions that will be, most practical and impactful when everyone is having an input towards them. And also governments should really be holding tech companies to account and really questioning, what they're doing to keep up with these trends and what they're doing to protect young people. But charities like ours and charities across the sector need to be collaborating with them. Everybody's expertise is kind of needed at the same time to get this right, because it's moving so quickly that, young people are almost like more qualified to talk about it than we are, who have like worked in the sector for a really long time and are there to protect them. Actually, what we find is like a lot of young people are basically more qualified in dealing with it and talking about it than we are.
I agree with you, Ellie. Beautifully said. At Refuge, we centre our survivors and their experiences to be able to make impactful change. Their voices offer guidance on how we best support fellow survivors, which leads me into the next part of the podcast as we look at the young people's voices recorded by Votes for Schools with the focus on cybercrime. This had over 50,000 responses in total from young people aged 5 to 18. When primary school voters aged 5 to 7 were asked, do you know how to keep your information safe? 84.6% said yes, whilst 15.4% said no. Then when primary school voters aged 7 to 11 were asked, do you know how to spot an online scam? 83.6% said yes, while 16.4% said no. Secondary school and college voters were asked, do we take cybercrime seriously? To which only 36.3% of secondary school voters aged 11 to 16 said yes, while the rest said no. Similarly, 45.2% of college students aged 16 plus said yes, while 54.8% voted no. How does these figures make you feel?
Well, I think these figures are both encouraging and concerning at the same time. On the one hand, it's really reassuring to see that a significant majority of primary age children are able to express feeling confident. That's great, right? The majority of young people are clearly technologically and digitally literate. And that's kind of picking up on the point I made previously. They're able to identify what those issues are. However, the data from the older children, I think it really highlights the stark reality that so many have so little faith in adults and the legislation that's meant to be there to protect them. And I think we urgently need, proactive education starting from a really young age to build on young people's critical analysis skills, as I said previously. And something that's, come out of that for us is kind of recognizing it as a charity, which is really exciting, is we're launching our first primary school program over the next few months. So because of the last few years and the growing digital landscape, it's really highlighted to us the need for such a program and to be talking to kids at a younger age about those skills and that critical analysis and what they're kind of consuming online. We can't ignore that children are engaging with technology at a younger and younger age. That's not going to go away. But teaching them how to navigate the digital world responsibly and safely, it's not just, a precaution. It's a necessity in today's fast evolving online landscape. It has to be the case because we're never going to get rid of it, And actually it can be used in such a positive way. And I think the more positivity and the more empowerment we have, the more it kind of drowns out the negativity and the fear around it.
This is exciting news, Ellie. Congratulations first and foremost for embarking on this venture. And again, you are absolutely right. The digital landscape is changing and we cannot ignore the facts we see in front of us. Children are engaging with technology at younger ages, and equipping them with knowledge and tools is a great way to empower our young people to navigate online digital safe spaces safely. Within the same report from Votes for Schools, we also have comments from the voters which read, "The fraud element of cybercrime is taken seriously. However, I think other parts are not taken as seriously." Another comment made was, "Most people don't because they think cybercrime isn't as serious as physical crime." Let's elaborate on this, Ellie. What do you think of these comments?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Those comments, they highlight a real issue. Many forms of cybercrime are, I think, a lot of the time dismissed as less serious, and particularly when children are involved. But the truth is, like, the impact of these crimes can be just as devastating, if not more so, especially for young people, right? Because it feels like they're their whole world. And a lot of young people are finding that connection online, especially with COVID. I think we like to put it to the back of our minds because it was such a horrible time. But we think about like the COVID generation and how they communicate and what they use. It's like a lot of it is technologically based. And we're seeing this, online more and more, especially with tech-enabled abuse. And one big challenge is that we often stop at telling kids what's illegal. Like, I think a lot of the time in schools, and it's really important that kids know the legality, but saying to young people, like, don't send explicit images because the legal age is 18. Like, let's be real, that approach doesn't work. And it's also not like a fully informed approach. So just telling young people not to do something isn't enough. And when we visit schools, we hear heartbreaking stories from children who have experienced image-based sexual abuse. And they tell us that previously they didn't feel like they could talk to anyone about having sent those images because they were afraid of getting into trouble or being judged. And that's a huge barrier for young people reaching and like asking for that help. And that's what preventative education must delve deeper into. It's not just about saying that's illegal, so don't do it, but it's about helping kids understand that abuse is never their fault and that there are people out there that want to help them, regardless of the image that they shared. So instead of going into a school and saying, this is illegal, which they probably would have heard over and over again. I mean, obviously we reiterate that message, but we talk to them about what can you actually do if this happens to you? Who's there to support you? What can be done? Because if we don't do that, then all they're going to feel like is that we're criminalizing them and they can't access that support and we can't understand it better as well. And, I think we need to shift how society views cybercrime altogether. Just because something happens online, as I said, it doesn't make it any less real or serious than something that happens in person. It doesn't have, less of an effect, essentially.
I just want to acknowledge the real life insights you are expressing today. You have touched on a common barrier we see, and it is huge. Thank you for that, Ellie. But let's continue to deep dive further into this section because there's so much we could dig into and talk on top of what's already been said, which is incredibly important. In this report, we can see the secondary, 16 plus, and college responses to "Do we take cybercrime seriously?" question. There's a further breakdown analysis, with it showing females that voted yes was a count of 5,573, and the females that voted no was a count of 9,928. For the males, it shows the votes for yes was a count of 6,103, and the no votes was a count of 10,244. For children and young people that identified as gender diverse, the votes for yes were a count of 1,761, and the counts for no was 2,989. A personal take from this section here is the number of votes of no's compared to the yeses in each voter group individually. There's a lot of insights and research into children and adults who identify as gender diverse being at higher risk to abuse, which we can infer to some extent has been relayed into these results. But also there's a lot of cybercrime concerns around young people within this age group, and the males' vote volume does stand out to me. What is your take and feelings on this, Ellie?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that historically marginalized communities often face high risk of abuse. And I think that that's probably reflected in those results. And it's why it's really crucial that we take an intersectional approach to addressing cybercrime. We need, tailored, diverse approaches to meet the needs of all young people, not just kind of one group of young people. And I think starting off with, a couple points I'll make here, but starting off with the acknowledgement of the existence of adultification is a really important thing to recognize. And I think that comes into play a lot of the time with online harm. Adultification, for any listeners who aren't aware of the term, is the practice of treating children as if they're older than they are, which can lead to a lot of discriminatory treatment. And it's often used to describe young Black men and women or children. And it's something that we see cross media, and especially with the young Black women that we work with in particular. We also know that 1 in 2 transgender women will experience sexual violence in their lifetime. A 2015 survey actually found that 58% of trans and non-binary people who interacted with law enforcement said that they experience mistreatment. And given that we've already discussed that cybercrime is often taken less seriously than physical crime, these experiences are just, likely to be heightened. But touching on what you said about male participants, I think it's striking, like the sheer volume of them who voted no. And it speaks to something deeper, a lack of faith in the systems that are meant to protect them, and also a growing vulnerability to those certain crimes that I spoke about earlier, like sextortion. For male victims of sexual violence, on average, it takes them 26 years to talk to anybody about their experience, not even just, a law enforcement or a therapist, just somebody that they know. And I think that makes men a lot more susceptible to cybercrimes because of that existing stigma. When they become victims of something like sextortion, many men feel an overwhelming sense of shame or fear of being judged. I mean, everybody does, but it stops a lot of men from reaching out. And I think perpetrators often exploit vulnerabilities like that isolation or lack of education about the issue, both of which are a growing, concern as it stands. But I think the takeaway is that we must and have to focus on educating children in a way that's inclusive and empathetic and proactive. It isn't enough to warn young people about the dangers, but we really need to strengthen the systems of support that address the unique challenges that children may face, whoever they are.
Thank you for your insights there, Ellie. And again, you've touched on some important points, which I'm sure the audience listening will appreciate. Now, I want to move on to another survey report from Votes for Schools, in which the main question was, is our older generation equipped to teach young people about the online world, which had a total of 4,771 votes. Here is the breakdown. Primary school voters aged 5 to 7, when asked, can adults and children learn from each other about the online world, 85.9% said yes, with 14.1% responses said no. Primary age voters aged 7 to 11 were asked, do adults have the tools to teach you about the online world? To which 54.9% said yes and 45.1% said no. Secondary school age voters 11 to 16 were asked, are adults equipped to teach you about the online world? Only 24.9% said yes. And voters aged 16 plus and were in college were asked the same question. There was a considerable 76.5% that said no. We can see within the statistics how confidence in adults teaching young people about the online world decreases with age. Ellie, what are your views on this? And may I ask, has this been a barrier for you that you have seen at Everyone's Invited at all?
Yeah, so this comes up a lot, especially with our work in schools with parents and teachers. I think right now we're actually facing the largest generational gap in human history when it comes to understanding technology in the online world. Like what's happening in young people's lives compared to their parents is so far apart. And the pace of that technological growth has been staggering. Even those of us who work in this space often struggle to keep up with how fast those trends are evolving. So for parents in older generations, I can understand it feels like they're standing on the outside of the world and they don't fully understand what's going on in their children's lives. And it can make it incredibly challenging for them to teach or guide young people through something that they're not experiencing in the same way. And yeah, so we do see this barrier at Everyone's Invited. Often young people feel like adults just don't get it. And I feel like that's where we position ourselves really well as a charity. We're kind of that bridge in between young people and the adults in their lives. They're not using the same apps, or they don't have the same risks, or even the same language that's being used is not the same. And I think the only way that we can really start to bridge that gap is through taking a whole school, holistic approach. So working with everybody. And one of the things that we say is whenever we go to schools, staff have to have training. Otherwise we can't work with the students, because the idea that we're, working with a group of people and then there's a whole other conglomerate of people that are there and we're not talking to them, it just doesn't make sense. And I think parental engagement is so important. parents don't need to be experts, but they do need to be engaged. And it's a minefield. It's really scary out there, but conversations about the online world should be a two-way street. Young people have so much that they can teach adults and vice versa. And I think what's really crucial is that parents feel empowered to ask questions to their kids and listen without judgment. And at the same time, there's a real need for that parent and staff training. When we run our workshops and training session, it helps adults better understand what young people are facing online. And just as importantly, and almost more importantly, it opens the door for discourse between generations. When adults show they're willing to learn, it encourages young people to share their experiences more openly. And we actually go as far to give staff and parents a detailed breakdown of terms that are currently being thrown around the classroom so that they can have that understanding and really step by step begin to bridge that gap. But ultimately, the online world isn't going to slow down, and neither is the pace of change. But if we can enable open and supportive conversations between children and adults, then we can start to, help young people navigate it safely and confidently. That's the goal anyway.
Thank you for your transparency, Ellie, as I'm sure this will give some relief to the listeners who may be experiencing this barrier also. In my role, I get feedback from children and young people about the quality of our materials and resources, as well as the overall experiences of the workshops. This allows me to see what I need to do to help with my retention and also the impact, as well as being relatable. So when I saw this comment within the report for Votes for Schools, I had to put it up for discussion with you before we close today, Ellie. The comment was within the report, older generations did not grow up with the same issues. They don't understand how young people use, experience the internet. For the last question of the day, you may have touched on this a bit already, but I just want to give you the space to elaborate on it. Please tell us your thoughts and what advice you would give to parents and other educators in regards to this comment.
Yeah, so just to kind of carry on from what I was saying in the previous question, I think advising parents to be genuinely engaged with what their children are consuming, which, it can be quite challenging at times because sometimes kids don't want to let you into what it is. But I think something that's worked really well for us is giving parents and adults kind of like vessels to have conversations. So a parent we work with told us that he lets his children watch Love Island, which is a reality dating show, but only on the condition that he watches it with them. So after every episode, they'd sit down and talk about, what they pick up on or on the drive to school in the morning. They'd think about the behaviors and the conversations, the relationships and the messaging. And we just thought it was such a great example of intergenerational engagement and communication. And it links to actually what we teach in our parent sharing sessions too. So we actually show the students clips from Love Island and other TV shows, and we highlight some of the things that young people are consuming. And that really helps to equip adults to start the conversations and to do it in a way that doesn't feel like they're telling them off or they're being aggressive. And I think that same principle applies to the online world. Adults need to engage in what young people are engaging with. And that might mean exploring apps that they're using, playing the games that they love, or even just sitting down and watching some TikToks with them. But, generally staying curious and open and not being afraid to ask questions is our biggest advice. Even if you don't fully understand the online world, showing that you care or that you're making an effort to and want to learn makes, all the difference, I think. When young people feel heard, they're more likely to open up and engage with the material that you're bringing. And I think that that's where the real impact happens. It's about finding common ground and being in touch with their generation.
Thank you so much, Ellie, for your time and your expertise in today's conversation. It's been a pleasure and I've enjoyed every moment, and I hope our listeners have been able to get some real great insights, perspectives and takeaways from today's discussion. We will keep bringing you a series of conversations focusing on more topics. If you have been affected by any of the issues we have covered in today's session, please do reach out. Contact us on the National Domestic Abuse Helpline on 0808 2000 247 from a device you think is safe. You can also chat to us on the live chat Monday to Friday from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. And if you need BSL services, we have interpreters available 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday. For more information on tech abuse, visit our website refugetechsafety.org. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care.